It wasn't the cold that woke me up, it was the silence. 1 second I was in the passenger seat, my daughter asleep against my chest, her tiny fist curled around the collar of my shirt. The next second the door was open and my husband's hand was on my shoulder. Not gentle, not the way it used to be, and he said, "Get out." I thought I'd misheard him. "What?" I said, "Get out, both of you." We were on Route 9, somewhere between the Costco and the overpass. I know that stretch of road because I drive it every week. But at 11 o'clock on a Tuesday night in February, with sleet coming sideways off the river, it looked like the edge of the world. "You're not serious," I said. He didn't answer. He just leaned across me and unlatched my seatbelt. I had maybe 4 seconds. I grabbed my daughter with both arms. She was 6 weeks old. She was still wearing the little yellow onesie from her pediatrician appointment that morning. And I stepped out because the alternative was falling out. He pulled the door shut before I could say another word. The tires threw slush onto my legs as he drove away. I stood there for a long time. I don't know how long. Long enough for the sleet to soak through my jacket. Long enough for my daughter to wake up and start crying. That thin, reedy newborn cry that cuts right through you, and I had nothing. No diaper bag. No wallet. No phone. It was sitting in the cuff holder where I'd left it when he told me to buckle her in. I had my daughter and the clothes I was wearing, and that was it. I started walking. I want to be honest about what I was thinking in those first few minutes, because I've told this story before and I always clean it up. Make it sound braver than it was. The truth is, I wasn't thinking about survival or dignity or getting even. I was thinking about how cold her ears looked. She didn't have a hat. I'd forgotten to put her hat back on after the appointment, and I was standing on the side of Route 9 in February with a 6-week-old who didn't have a hat. And I could not stop staring at her ears. I tucked her inside my jacket and kept walking. The first car didn't stop, neither did the second. The third one slowed down and I felt this flooding relief, and then it sped up again and I actually laughed, which I think was probably shock. The fourth car stopped. It was a dark green Subaru. Older, one of the back taillights slightly cracked. It pulled about 20 feet ahead of me and just sat there with the hazards on. I didn't move at first. My daughter had stopped crying and gone very still the way newborns do when they're working too hard to stay warm. And that stillness scared me more than anything else that night, so I walked toward the car. The window came down. The woman behind the wheel was maybe 60, 65, silver hair pulled back, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead even though it was the middle of the night. She looked at me, and then at the baby, and then back at me. "How far is your house?" she asked. "I don't know where I am," I said. She reached across and opened the passenger door. Her name was June. She told me that right away, before she even put the car back in drive. "I'm June. I'm not going to hurt you. I've got hand sanitizer in the console if you need it." Which was such a specific, practical thing to say that I started crying. Not the dignified kind, the kind where you can't catch your breath. She drove with both hands on the wheel and didn't say anything while I cried, which was the right call. When I finally stopped, she asked me where I wanted to go, and I realized I didn't have an answer. My mother lived 40 minutes away. My best friend was in the middle of a divorce of her own and barely holding on. My sister was in Portland. I had a house, our house, but my husband was presumably on his way back to it, and I couldn't picture walking through that door. "Is there a hospital nearby?" I asked. Not because anything was wrong exactly, but because it was the only neutral place I could think of. Somewhere with lights on. "Mercy General is 10 minutes, June said. "Okay," I said. "Can you take me there?" She took me there. She walked me in through the ER entrance and stayed until the triage nurse came over, and then she touched my arm once, lightly, and said, "You did the right thing getting in the car." I never got her last name. I've thought about her 100 times since. The nurses were kind. They took us to a room and warmed my daughter up and checked her over. And one of the nurses, a young woman with box braids and the most efficient hands I've ever seen, wrapped her in 2 heated blankets, and handed her back to me without making me feel stupid for not having her hat. They let me use the hospital phone to call my mother. My mother arrived in 45 minutes. She walked in and took one look at me and didn't ask a single question. She just took the baby so I could have both hands, and she sat down next to me on the exam table and said, "Tell me what you need." That was when I started to understand what I'd married into. My husband and I had been together 4 years, married for 2. He was charming in the specific way that only becomes visible in retrospect, the kind of charming that's actually about control, where everything he did for you turned out to have a string attached. I'd noticed things. The way he handled our joint account, moving money around in ways I didn't fully understand. The way he'd talk over me at dinner parties and then apologize so smoothly afterward that I'd feel guilty for being annoyed. The way he'd started, in the last few months of my pregnancy, to make me feel like I was failing at things I hadn't known were tests. But I'd told myself the story that a lot of women tell themselves, that it would get better, that he was stressed, that the baby would change things. The baby did not change things. He'd come home from work the night of February 14th, yes, Valentine's Day, I know. And I'd had dinner ready and the baby had been fussy all day and I hadn't showered and the kitchen wasn't perfectly clean. And something about the look on his face when he walked in told me we were already past the point of conversation. He said something about the dishes. I said something back. He told me I'd become impossible to live with. I told him I'd just had a baby 6 weeks ago. He said that wasn't an excuse to let yourself go. I don't remember exactly what happened between that and the car. I remember getting my daughter because I didn't want her in the middle of it. I remember him saying we were going for a drive to clear our heads. I remember thinking that was a good sign, that he wanted to work it out, that we were going to drive around the block and come back and be okay. I was sitting in the hospital thinking about how wrong I'd been when one of the ER nurses came in and said there was someone asking for me at the front desk. Not my husband. An older woman, she said she knew me from a long time ago. I couldn't imagine who it was. My mother was right there. My sister was in Portland. I didn't know anyone in this part of town. I went to the front desk anyway. She was standing near the door, wearing a belted wool coat and holding her keys like she wasn't sure whether to stay or go. She was maybe 70, with the kind of posture that makes you think she used to be taller. She looked at me like I was something she'd been searching for in a room full of clutter and had finally found. "You're Catherine's daughter," she said. My mother's name was Margaret, not Catherine. I opened my mouth to correct her. "Your birth mother," the woman said quietly. "Catherine Reeves. I've been looking for you for 12 years. The thing about receiving news you don't have a framework for is that your brain just stops. Like a browser with too many tabs open, it freezes on the last thing that made sense." I stood there looking at this woman in her wool coat and I thought, very clearly, I should go check on the baby. "I need to sit down," I said instead. Her name was Vera. No, wait. Her name was Adele. Adele Foss. She had been my birth mother, Catherine's closest friend since they were 19 years old. College roommates, the kind of friendship that survives marriages and moves and decades of life getting in the way. She'd known about me. She'd known Catherine had placed a baby for adoption in 1994, a girl born in March. And she'd watched Catherine carry that for the rest of her life. Catherine had died 11 years ago. Ovarian cancer. Fast and brutal. She was 51. Before she passed, Adele said, "She made me promise to find you. She said she needed you to know that leaving you wasn't," she stopped, started again. "She needed you to know it wasn't because she didn't want you. Your biological father was not a safe person. She was 23 and she was alone and she did the only thing she could think of to give you a life that wasn't his." I sat across from this woman in a hospital waiting room at midnight, with sleet still coming down outside and my newborn daughter 30 feet away in a heated blanket, and I tried to absorb the information that my birth mother had loved me and been afraid for me and spent decades hoping I was okay. "How did you find me here?" I finally asked. "Tonight, of all nights." Adele's expression shifted. She reached into her coat pocket and set something on the table between us, a small silver locket on a thin chain, slightly tarnished with a faint floral engraving on the front. "This was Catherine's," she said. "She wore it every day." Inside there's a photo of her and her mother, and on the back she had your name engraved, not your adoptive name, the name she gave you before she signed the papers. I'd been wearing a locket since I was 16. My adoptive mother had given it to me. She'd said she found it in a box of things that came with my adoption paperwork, that she'd saved it for the right time. I'd never opened it because the clasp was stuck and I was afraid of breaking it. I wore it every day anyway. I reached up and touched my collarbone. I saw it when you walked past me in the parking lot, Adele said. When you were coming in. I almost didn't say anything. I thought I was imagining it. She pressed her lips together. I'd been carrying that Locket's twin for 11 years. Catherine had one made for herself and one for the baby she let go. I would know that engraving anywhere. I didn't say anything for a long time. She looked for you too, Adele said. When open adoption records became easier to access, she filed. But you'd moved twice and the system. She shook her head. The system isn't set up for this. No, I said, it's not. My mother came out then, the woman who had raised me, who had driven 45 minutes through sleet without asking a single question. And I looked at her and I felt the specific vertigo of realizing you can love two true things that seem like they should cancel each other out. She looked at Adele. Adele looked at her. Something passed between them that I didn't have words for. I introduced them. That's the only way I knew how to start. The next several months were not clean or simple or the kind of story that fits in a sentence. I want to be honest about that too. My husband, I'll call him that still, though not for much longer, came to the hospital the next morning. He was composed. He said he was sorry, that he'd overreacted, that the stress of a new baby was getting to him, that he'd been having a hard time at work. He said all the right things in all the right order, and 6 months earlier I might have believed them, or at least believed in them enough to go home. I told him I needed some time. He took that as a negotiating position. He hired an attorney before I did. I found out later he'd transferred a significant amount of money out of our joint savings in the weeks before Valentine's Day. Not all of it, just enough to make the picture look different than it was. He'd also apparently been in contact with a woman from his office for the better part of a year, which explained several things I'd been trying not to add up. I got my own attorney through a referral from one of the nurses at Mercy General, which is not how people usually find lawyers, but turned out to be exactly right. Her name is irrelevant. What matters is, she was sharp and patient, and she did not let me settle for less than I was owed. The divorce took 14 months. In that time, I moved in with my mother, went back to the part-time bookkeeping work I'd put on hold when my daughter was born, and slowly began to rebuild a version of my life that had my name on it. The house was the main thing. My husband had argued it should go to him since his income had been paying the mortgage. What he hadn't counted on was that I'd been meticulous about documenting our joint contributions, the money I'd put in before her birth, the home improvement projects I'd managed, the 3 years of records I'd kept in a folder on my laptop that he didn't know existed because he'd never been particularly interested in what I did when he wasn't watching. The house sold. We split the equity. It was less than I'd hoped and more than he wanted to give me, which I've come to understand is probably as fair as these things get. Adele and I started meeting for coffee on Saturdays. Slowly, over weeks, she told me about Catherine. Not in any organized way, but the way you tell someone about a person you loved, in fragments, whatever surfaces. Catherine had been a reader, apparently. She'd had a garden. She'd been the kind of person who remembered everyone's birthday and showed up with exactly the right thing. She would have liked you, Adele told me once. She would have found you funny. I didn't know what to do with that, so I just said thank you. She gave me the locket in the spring, the one Catherine had kept. I put both of them on the same chain. It sounds like something from a movie. And I understand if that's hard to believe. But I've stopped worrying about whether my life sounds believable. It happened the way it happened. My daughter turned 1 in March. She's walking now, this purposeful, wobbling walk that looks like she's navigating a ship in rough water. She has her great-grandmother's eyes, people tell me, meaning my adoptive mother's mother, and I think about how identity moves through families in all these invisible ways. Blood and choice and accident all tangled up together. My husband signed the final papers on a Wednesday afternoon. My attorney sent me a text that said it's done, and I was in the middle of changing a diaper, and I just said, okay, and kept going. I don't know what I expected to feel. Relief, maybe. Instead, I felt something quieter, like the moment after a long noise stops and you realize how much energy you'd been spending just adjusting to it. I called my mother that evening. I called Adele. I put my daughter to bed and sat on the floor of the room I was renting in my mother's house, the room that used to be my childhood bedroom and still had the faint outline of a poster I'd taken down in high school, and I thought about Catherine. I thought about what she'd been 23 years old and alone, and scared and still trying to do the right thing by a baby she couldn't keep. I hoped she knew it worked out. I don't have a tidy way to end this because life doesn't really give you those. I'm still in my mother's house though. I'm saving to move out by the end of the year. I'm still doing bookkeeping and I've picked up 2 new clients since January. My daughter is thriving. Adele came to her birthday party and brought a gift Catherine had apparently bought years ago and asked Adele to hold on to. A small stuffed rabbit, a little worn at the ears, that Adele had kept in a box for over a decade waiting to give it to someone. My daughter named it Bun. She carries it everywhere. The night my husband drove away on Route 9, I thought I was at the end of something. I was in the sleet with no phone, no wallet, no hat on my daughter's head, and I genuinely did not know what came next. It turns out what came next was June in her Subaru and a hospital and a woman in a wool coat and 2 lockets and 14 months of hard, steady work and a child who walks like she's navigating rough water and somehow, improbably, knows exactly where she's going. So do I now. That's the thing I want you to hear. So do I. I've thought a lot about what it actually takes to survive something like this. Not dramatically, not in the movie version where there's a single turning point in the swelling soundtrack, but in the real version, where it's just Tuesday after Tuesday and you keep going because the alternative is standing still on a dark road in the sleet. What I keep coming back to is the locket. Not as a symbol or a sign. I don't think the universe was sending me a message that night. I think Catherine made a careful, painful choice under terrible circumstances, and Adele kept a promise for 12 years out of sheer stubbornness and love, and I happened to walk through a hospital parking lot at the right moment. That's not fate. That's what happens when people decide to be decent and then actually follow through. My husband made choices too. He chose, slowly and then all at once, to move money without telling me, to make me feel small about dishes and showers and the ordinary mess of keeping a newborn alive, to decide on a Tuesday night in February that a dark road was a reasonable place to leave his wife and daughter. Every one of those choices had a consequence, and none of them landed the way he expected. Because he'd miscalculated what I was willing to accept and how carefully I'd been paying attention. I'm not saying I was perfect in that marriage. I stayed longer than I should have because I kept trying to understand his side of things, kept extending the benefit of the doubt past the point where it made sense. That was its own kind of mistake, confusing loyalty with tolerance, confusing patience with wisdom. There's a difference between thinking clearly about a hard situation and just hoping it resolves itself. I learned that the slow way. What carried me through the 14 months of the divorce wasn't anger, though there was anger. It was something quieter. It was sitting down with the records I'd kept, the account statements and the receipts and the timeline I'd constructed in a folder on my laptop, and realizing that I had paid attention, that I had not let myself be made entirely invisible even when that was what was being asked of me, being methodical about my own life, taking it seriously enough to document it. That turned out to matter in ways I couldn't have predicted when I was doing it. And then there was just the getting up. My daughter needed to be fed. Adele was coming on Saturday. My mother had driven 45 minutes in sleet without asking a single question, and was not going to watch me collapse if I had any say in it. So I got up. And then I got up again. Strength isn't something you find. It's something you practice in very small increments until one day you look back and realize you've crossed a distance you couldn't have imagined crossing. June, the woman in the green Subaru. I never found her. I've thought about how I'd like to tell her that the baby she helped me keep warm that night is now walking around the house with a stuffed rabbit named Bun. absolutely convinced she owns the place. I think June would like that. I think Adele does. I think somewhere Catherine does too. That's enough for me. It's more than enough.